Ladies and gentlemen, start your engines. We're about to embark on a wild ride through the wonderful world of front axles. This isn't just any old car part we're talking about, it's the unsung hero of your daily commute, the silent guardian of your road trips. Did you know that the average car owner thinks about their front axle about as often as they think about their appendix? That's right, only when something goes terribly wrong. But today, we're going to change that. We're going to make front axles sexy, well, as sexy as a piece of metal that spends its life covered in grease can be. So buckle up, Buttercup. We're about to take a journey into the heart of your car's locomotion. By the end of this, you'll be the front axle expert at your next barbecue. Who knows, you might even start looking at your car differently. Just don't name your front axle. That's weird. Trust me, I've been there. Alright, let's get down to brass tacks. What exactly is a front axle and why should you care? Well, imagine your car as a body. The engine is the heart, the fuel system is the digestive tract, and the axles, they're the legs. And just like your legs, the front axle has a pretty important job. It helps your car move and supports its weight. Without it, your car would be about as mobile as a couch. Engineer. Media. Engineer explaining front axle functions with diagrams and animations. But the front axle isn't just about keeping your car off the ground. It's like that overachieving kid in school who was in every club and still had time to tutor on weekends. The front axle steers the wheels, absorbs bumps and shocks from the road, and even helps with braking. It's basically the Swiss Army knife of car parts. Now you might be thinking, Jay, this all sounds great, but I've never even seen my front axle. And you're right, the front axle is like a hard-working stagehand in a theater production. It does all the heavy lifting behind the scenes but never takes a bow. It's tucked away under your car, quietly doing its job while you cruise down the highway, blissfully unaware of its existence. So the next time you're stuck in traffic, just remember, your front axle feels your pain. Now that we've established why the front axle is the unsung hero of your car, let's meet the family, car enthusiast. First up, we have the star of the show, the axle shaft. This is the main beam that runs from one wheel to the other. It's like the backbone of the front axle, holding everything together. Next, we have the CV joints. No, that doesn't stand for charismatic vehicular joints, although that would be cool. It's actually constant velocity joints. These little guys are the flexibility experts of the axle world. They allow the axle to bend and flex as you turn the wheels, all while maintaining a constant speed. They're like those street performers who can twist themselves into pretzels. Car enthusiasts. Then we have the wheel hub. This is where the rubber meets the, well, axle. The wheel hub connects the axle shaft to the wheel itself. It's like the middleman in a very important transaction. And let's not forget about the bearings. These tiny balls of steel allow the wheel to rotate smoothly around the axle. Car enthusiast, last but not least, we have the axle housing. This is the protective shell that keeps all these parts safe and sound. Alright folks, it's time to roll up our sleeves and get our hands dirty. Metaphorically, of course. So, how does this front axle contraption actually work? Well, it's a bit like a very complicated game of pass the parcel, except instead of a gift, we're passing motion and power. Engineer. It all starts with the engine. When you hit the gas pedal, or the go faster button as I like to call it, the engine creates power. This power is then sent through the transmission and into the differential. The differential is like a traffic cop, directing the power to the wheels. But here's where our friend the front axle comes in. It takes that power from the differential and delivers it to the wheels, making them spin faster than a politician avoiding a tough question. Engineer. But that's not all, folks. The front axle isn't just about going forward. When you turn the steering wheel, the front axle has to adjust. This is where those CV joints we talked about earlier come into play. They allow the axle to bend and flex as you turn, all while still delivering power to the wheels. And let's not forget about the front axle's role in absorbing shocks. So the next time you're cruising down a smooth road, thank your front axle. Section 5, front axle fitness, keeping your car's legs in shape. Now that we've gotten to know our front axle, it's time to talk about keeping it in shape. Because just like us humans, front axles need a little TLC to stay healthy. Mechanic as S1. First things first, regular checkups. Your front axle doesn't need an annual physical, but it does need regular inspections. This usually involves a mechanic getting up close and personal with your car's underside. They'll check for any signs of wear and tear, leaks, or damage. Next up, lubrication. No, I'm not talking about that kind of lubrication. Get your mind out of the gutter. I'm talking about grease. Your front axle components need to stay well lubricated to function properly. Most modern cars have sealed systems that don't need regular greasing, but it's still something to keep an eye on. Mechanic as S1. Lastly, let's talk about alignment. No, not the spiritual kind. I'm talking about wheel alignment. If your wheels are out of alignment, it puts extra stress on your front axle. Section 6. When good axles go bad, troubleshooting 101. Alright folks, it's time to talk about the dark side of front axles. Because even the best of us have our off days, and front axles are no exception. Mechanic first up, the dreaded clunking noise. If your car starts making a noise like a skeleton dancing in a closet every time you accelerate or decelerate, your front axle might be trying to tell you something. And that something is probably, "Help! I'm falling apart here!" This could be a sign of worn-out CV joints or a damaged axle shaft. Next on our list of front axle red flags vibrations. If your steering wheel is shaking more than Elvis's hips, you might have a front axle problem. This could be due to a bent axle shaft or worn-out CV joints. Mechanic last but not least, grease. If you notice dark grease on the inside of your wheels or around your wheel hub, it's time to pay attention. This could be a sign that your CV joint boot has torn, letting all that precious grease escape. So if you spot any of these signs, it's time to take your car to the mechanic, because a stitch in time saves 9, and a repair now could save you from a major headache and wallet ache down the road. Section 7. The evolution of axles, from stone wheels to space age. Alright, history buffs, gather round. It's time for a thrilling journey through the annals of axle history. I promise it's more exciting than it sounds. Well, maybe. Let's start at the beginning, shall we? Picture this, it's 3500 BC, and some bright spark has just invented the wheel. Great job, unnamed ancient inventor. But here's the kicker. That wheel needs something to spin on. Enter the axle, stage left. Historian. These early axles were about as sophisticated as a caveman's club. We're talking solid wooden beams that the wheels were fixed to. The whole assembly turned together, which was great for going straight, but about as maneuverable as a freight train. Jump ahead to the Industrial Revolution, and axles are getting a major upgrade. We're talking iron and steel, baby. These new materials meant axles could be stronger and more durable. But the real game changer came with the invention of the automobile. Suddenly, axles had to do more than just spin. Historian, and that brings us to today. Modern front axles are marvels of engineering, with CV joints that can bend at extreme angles, lightweight materials that can withstand enormous forces, and designs that improve fuel efficiency. Section 8. Front axle myths, debunking the automotive urban legends. Alright folks, it's time to put on our detective hats and do some myth busting. Because when it comes to front axles, there's more misinformation out there than a politician's Twitter feed. Car enthusiast, first up, the myth that front-wheel drive cars don't have front axles. I've heard this one more times than I've heard bad car puns, and that's saying something. The truth is, all cars have front axles, whether they're front-wheel drive, rear-wheel drive, or all-wheel drive. The confusion comes from the fact that front-wheel drive cars often use a slightly different setup called a transaxle. But make no mistake, it's still an axle. Next on our myth-busting agenda, the idea that front axles never need maintenance. This is about as true as saying I never need a haircut. While it's true that modern front axles are pretty low maintenance, they're not invincible. Car enthusiast, last but not least, let's tackle the myth that a noisy front end always means a bad front axle. While noise can certainly be a sign of axle trouble, it's not the only possibility. It could be your suspension, your brakes, or maybe just that loose change rattling around in your cup holder. The point is, don't jump to conclusions. Section 9. DIY front axle care. Because you're worth it. Alright DIY enthusiasts, this one's for you. Now before we start, let me be clear. I'm not suggesting you should rebuild your front axle in your driveway, unless you're a certified mechanic or have a death wish. Some things are best left to the professionals.